Alrighty, I have Robert Buckley, who's the chief instructor and CEO of Disaster Control and Prevention, who's also a partner of National Severe Weather Network. Good evening.
How you doing, Jeff? Good to be here.
Alrighty, with this latest discussion, with the 11 o'clock discussion, National Hurricane Center has upgraded to a Category 3. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we all kind of expected when this particular event started to near the southern Bahamas area that it would stagger and wobble a little, simply because of the change in ocean patterns. Most storms do that, and when they do, they have a little extra time to sit over that really, really warm water that comes from the Gulf through that area around to Florida. And when it does that, they almost every time gain strength. The storm has really impressed me in its ability to gather strength as quickly as it has. I watch what I normally look for is barometric pressure and core temperature of the seas, and they just dropped, which is something you don't normally see. The last time I can remember seeing a reaction similar to this was, I hate to use the S word, but Sandy. Sandy behaved a lot like Joaquin is behaving right now, where it will fluctuate simply by moving over different types of water and different densities of water and their temperatures. So I think we definitely anticipated it doing that stagger for a minute, kind of like a boxer's blow. And as it passes the Bahamas, or if it goes right over, it will probably slow a little. And I'm in agreement with the track that puts it near Chesapeake Bay, Cape Hatteras area. So that's particularly problematic because that area has been inundated with, just over the past couple of days, they took on 7 inches of rain, and they're expecting another 10 inches before Joaquin even makes it there. Now, we're talking an area from, the northern tip of North Carolina all the way up to Newark, New Jersey. That's about the size of the storm. So when you're talking that much precipitation in that area before the storm even got there, they don't have palm trees like we do down in sunny Savannah. These trees can't take a whole lot of flooding, and it's almost a liquefaction like you would see in an earthquake. There's so much water that there's nothing holding the roots in place anymore, and every single tree will fall. Now, anybody who's been up to Norfolk, like you and I, there's an endless supply of 100-plus-year-old oak trees. So your damage is going to be much more prevalent. It's going to be problematic to rescuers, recovery. I think we were talking a minute ago about the need for chainsaws. That's a very real scenario, because that's what they'll be doing. And I really do think that track will be what's going to happen here. What are your thoughts?
And that's my question I have for you as well. Is there's that one model that is still showing that it's still going to take an northeastward turn and stay out over the Atlantic and move over towards Long Island and New Hampshire areas before it even hits landfall. Do you think that is still possible, or is that model outdated or just misguided?
Well, I think when we look at models in this wonderful age of computers and predictabilities, I think sometimes they're even entertaining. But really what it boils down to is the power of the jet stream. And you and I both know through the years, we watched that jet stream change in a couple of hours. And the jet stream is one of the most powerful jets on the planet. So it's also the most finicky. So a lot of things affect it. Any kind of dip in temperature, the humidity from the storm itself could actually affect the jet stream. So, I mean, it's one of the things as storm spotters and chasers and things of that nature that we experience all the time. That is the $64,000 question. What is that jet stream going to do?
Exactly.
Right now, it's kind of bowed through the Ohio Valley and up out towards kind of Vermontish, maybe New Hampshire area, out that way, a big dip like that. That is absolutely changeable within half a day's time. But you have to understand, most of these models are built off of the jet stream and what the Earth commonly uses, the kind of airflow the Earth has all the time. They take an average of it, and it's a computer thing, and that's what generates those kind of spaghetti models. So the unfortunate thing about doing it like that is that there's always the Mother Nature factor. If she gets ticked, I've seen tornadoes turn completely around and go the other way. To give you an example, I worked a tornado in Gerald, Texas, and that tornado actually turned around and came back and mowed down the part of the city that it didn't hit the first time. It's the first time anyone ever recorded it doing it. It was the most bizarre thing, but that's what we're dealing with. You're dealing with something that we don't have any control over. It's not a law of averages, although we like to think that it takes somewhat into account. You can get an idea, but at the end of the day, you're still scratching your head. And no one wants to be that guy. I totally understand how people go, I'm not going to give you a probability because, the boy who cries wolf. But I think what's good about modelization and technology like that is that it gives you a broad spectrum. And, but it also gives you focused probability as well. You can say from, now granted this is a lot of space, but you can say from the tip of North Carolina to Newark, yeah, that's a huge span of land. But when you think 20 years ago, we were saying the eastern seaboard. We could narrow it down to the eastern seaboard. I think we've come a long way, and it certainly helps. The people who, like you and I, the responders of the world, who have gotten older. It certainly gives them a better way to stage, gives them a better way to move assets that they may be able to get closer prior to the storm. So while spaghetti models are great, you do have to understand that there's always a solve for X, and you can't get away from that.
Exactly.
So.
Okay, so let's go back to what you were talking about with surface temperatures and water temperatures. What is going on with that right now?
In relation to
being down in the Bahamas and to where, we'll say, up north towards the Florida-Georgia line.
Oh, okay. Well, anytime you have water kind of in a bottleneck, and that is certainly the case between that 90 miles between Miami and Cuba, and if you trace your finger up to Bahamas, that area right in there it's somewhat shallow, but it's also there are literally things in your way, islands, things like that will make it more shallow, and the more shallow water is, the more heat it's going to hang on to. So that's why Miami is a bit saltier than anywhere else in the world, except for Africa. But it's because water gets accumulated there, and it doesn't move unless it's forced, it doesn't move around as much as, say, the rest of the planet does because it's in that bottleneck. Unfortunately, the flip side of that is true as well. When you get in a bottleneck, you have water moving around, so you're kind of teaching the hurricane to spin because it's almost like a whirlpool. As it comes out of the Gulf, it goes up past Cuba and out into the Atlantic Ocean proper. And it creates that energy that can a lot of time fuel a tropical depression or a tropical wave into an actual full-blown storm. And it's a lot easier to do it there. I hate to put a human side to storms, but there always is. Hurricanes tend to like things like that. They like where they can get more energy. So, you watch the storm and you go, wow, it actually went the wrong way. Well, it didn't go the wrong way. Not if you think like a storm, which I know sounds crazy, but the storms are going to look for what gives them more energy. And unfortunately, if they stay a little bit over that water, or they feel, I don't know if you could really, I'm just trying to make an example of it. If they know that there's warmer water or tumultuous water or both at the same time, they're going to gravitate towards that. And fortunately, it can only take that for so long because the storm becomes very heavy and literally dense. And when that happens, it has to start either moving on or burn itself out right there. So that's why it actually staggered down there. Now, as you go up the coast, naturally it's going to cool off a bit because you're diluting it. Once the water gets exposed to the real Atlantic, it gets diffuse. And the heat tends to stable out. The movement kind of stables out into a predictable current. Things like that. And that's where your actual steering current comes from. Because if it stays in that little bottleneck down there, either one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to waltz into Miami, which would give us another Andrew, or it's going to just obliterate the Bahamas, which, if you've ever been to the Bahamas, those guys only make their houses out of, plywood and studs. You know why? Because every year some storm comes by and flattens the place. So they adapt very well. But they also have a very big realization that we live in a very accident-prone area, if you would. So that's kind of what I'm talking about as what steers and how that storm will gain and lose strength, respectively.
With this cold front that's supposedly coming towards the southern end of the eastern seaboard, how will that affect the hurricane in itself? I mean, will it help steer it? Will it make it spin faster? What do you think?
Well, when it comes to, I take it you're talking about the current front that's running sea breeze over the middle Georgia into the end of South Carolina.
Right.
That's giving Savannah rain right now. Those are good things for us. They're fortunate because what those kind of fronts will do, particularly when they're strong, like this one is, not a whole lot of precipitation in it, but there's a lot of energy there. So what ends up happening is as long as there's a big enough contrast, it kind of shields this area from the hurricane because, again, not to give it feelings and make it a human thing, hurricanes don't like cold because it kills them, So it will try to steer away from that because, and when I say it doesn't like it, what is really happening is it slows the spin of the hurricane and it starts burning up energy. So I think as you see it go by Georgia and up past South Carolina, you'll see that Category 3 come down to a Category 2 because it does get affected by a front. So in a way, it kind of worked out for us. If there wasn't, I could definitely see landfall, say somewhere between Jacksonville, Brunswick, and Savannah. So it's a good thing in a way. But anytime you have contrasting temperatures and contrasting even humidities, storms will stay away from them. We watch them in tornadoes all the time. And tornadoes are just little hurricanes. They basically work off the same premise. The physics of those storms are pretty much the same dynamic. So what happens is when a different or a contrasting temperature, usually plus or minus 5 or 6 degrees, what happens is they start to burn that spin off and cool it down. And they don't like that. So they're going to move away from it. So thank goodness, that's happening in Georgia right now, or the water would be very deep right here. I'd be standing in a lot of water right now. So, anytime you get that, unfortunately, fronts are a lot different than, say, the jet stream. The jet stream works on power, not temperature or humidity. It's sheer wind that is circling the planet. That's all it's doing, looking for the path of least resistance. So I didn't want anybody getting confused by, a lot of people will look at the jet stream and go, well, why did it behave that way when the front just pushed it off of here? Well, fronts are contrasting agents, and that's why we have storms to begin with. The jet stream is a current of air that travels in the atmosphere. It doesn't make any rhyme or reason. It does what it wants to, and it kind of sets the course for the weather that we have. So, yeah.
Now, last year,
go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, last year when we had a hurricane roll up the East Coast that made landfall over at the in North Carolina on the Outer Banks, it was causing a whole bunch of spin-off of tornadoes. Just real quick, what causes those?
Well, the problem with the first thing you got to understand about hurricanes is they're a big group of thunderstorms. That's what they do. They get a bunch of guys. It's almost like a West Side Story kind of thing. They get a bunch of guys with thunderstorms, and they all get together, and they all hang out in the same place. And they kind of cruise around each other. Different than a tornado, well, but not that different, because tornadoes can have multi-vortex. And it's kind of the same premise. But what happens in especially lower strength hurricanes, say Category 1, even just, that's why Georgia gets so timid about tropical waves and tropical storms as opposed to hurricanes. Hurricanes are usually very quick. They come in, they do their thing, and they leave. Tropical waves, tropical storms, tropical depressions, on the other hand, come in, they flood the place, and they spout off all these independent cells inside of the storm. And they spout them off because there's not very much rotation, not very much main rotation in those kinds of storms. So the rotation that's happening is left off in the bands, the outer bands of the storm. And that is very conducive for just these generic spot thunderstorms that eventually become tornadic, and you get convection out of them. Next thing you know, it's barking down your street and knocking your house down. That's kind of that breaking point between tropical storm and hurricane. You don't really see a whole lot of tornadoes in Category 2 and up, only because there's so much strength in the storm to begin with. It's busy doing its own thing. But as you get under the 100-mile-an-hour mark, you start to see these thunderstorms developing and acting independently. And when that happens, it's a very bad day for anybody who's in the path of that, because not only are you getting damaging winds, 85 miles an hour, maybe 90 miles an hour from the storm itself, you got this crazy F2 that just set down on your block. So it's kind of insult to injury. But the reason that happens is typically because if you get past 100 miles an hour or so, maybe 110, you're too powerful to let those storms get much convection. You get under that 100-mile-an-hour mark, and little cells inside the storm begin to be able to act independently. And most of the time without any kind of notice, Even with some of the best radar equipment we have these days, we can't spot them fast enough. They're gone by the time we warned anybody.
Right.
So they all pose their same problems.
And typically with the hurricane, with the hurricane warning, you'll also see a whole bunch of tornado warnings associated with those.
Absolutely, yeah. And like I said, that's why when typically the East Coast doesn't really see a whole lot of 3 and above hurricanes. They'll see Cat 1, Cat 2, and some lower strength 3 storms. But they won't see a Katrina. You'd be hard pressed to find a Katrina in the annals of history for the East Coast. But and thank God, But even Katrina, as it went ashore, there was an immense amount of damage that was caused by tornadoes, not exactly the hurricane itself. So, it can happen. When you're working with that much energy that's trying to displace itself, it's going to present itself in a whole bunch of different ways. It's going to show it off by excessive lightning, straight line winds, microbursts, the whole gamut. So now you have essentially a 700-mile wide tornado, and that's not good for anybody. So that's why we see those kinds of warnings pop up all the time, because the storms that we get are very conducive to independent thunderstorm activity.
Right. Let's get into your specialty, prevention and control.
This part of disaster control, where we specialize in storm response, is very much based in preparation. On our website, disastercontrolandprevention.com, we have an entire blog that's updated, at least once a week, with different ideas from different responders. One of the interesting things about us is there's nobody who writes or consults with us who doesn't have at least 10 years in public service. And when I say that, I mean fire department, rescue, emergency management, law enforcement. These are the guys who've been there, and they've learned from their mistakes. So when you read a blog from us, it's because we've been there, not because we read it in a book, not because, a friend of ours told us, or a grandpappy told us a million years ago what happened to him. We've been there, and we don't want to see the same things happen to people naturally. That's why we're in the business we're in. So when you go to our website, you can get, and these are all downloadable for free, evacuation checklists, what you need to bring with you, what to expect from the storm, what to expect from your local and state resources. And this year, we had just managed to get a resource page for, let's say if, we'll take this one. Let's say that we really do know by Friday, maybe, that Joaquin's going into Chesapeake. Well, we can sit back for a second. I can email, Maryland's Emergency Management Division. We're all in contact with each other. And they will immediately send me back all of their resource telephone numbers, emails, shelter locations, that kind of thing beforehand. And we get that out to our people, and we'll either blog about it or at least get it out on the main page, even the Facebook page. Because anytime we can help expedite those kinds of things, we need to do it. Because in the end, if you have prepared people to become less injured and they become less dead, and nobody likes dead people. So what we focus on is not letting you get to that point in the first place.
Right.
Now, if you are in that place, we can also help there. We can, just like I did with somebody else today, we have resources all over the country. So as long as we know what your zip code is, we can look and find the person closest to there and get an update from that person, and then talk to their distributor or their incident commander or whatever and say, this is what's going on in this zip code. Can you send somebody over? Because it's all about communication. And as long as people are talking to each other, things get wary and they get scary and they get frustrating. But as long as the message is getting through, we're being effective. We haven't really put response teams together, except in Georgia. But that's usually because the mentality of America now, thankfully, in the past probably since 9/11, the mentality of America has changed. The vast majority of Americans are very willing to help each other out without looking down the street waiting for the FEMA truck to show up. They will help each other, which is the way it used to be, but then we got away from that. Now it's back again. People are very willing to just put a hand out. They'll take a family in, things like that, as long as they have the information they need to do it. And our readership in the past year has tripled. Thousands of people now have our checklists and our guides. They downloaded them for free, they use them, and they write back to us and they say, hey, thanks for doing that. We would have never thought of this. And that's all it takes, And when you're talking about a group of people who have actually been there and done it, we put our heads together and we get an average of how we can help. And then we write about it. Or we're on the phones, or we're answering emails every single day through the duration of the storm, or whatever's going on, chemical response, hazmat, CBRN, whatever. We treat everything the same way, the same amount of determination. So that's kind of the beauty of disaster control, is that there's always somebody here. So when the chips are down, you can email us, call us, we'll direct you to the right information, or you can just download it off our website. Doesn't cost you a dime. Takes you 5 minutes. And that 5 minutes means a lot when you're sitting in the middle of your destroyed neighborhood or flooded neighborhood and don't know what to do. So, that's basically what we are determined to do, and so far we've been pretty effective.
Beautiful. What kind of tips and tricks do you have for those people that may be affected that are listening right now by Joaquin?
The very first thing I always tell everybody is get in touch with your local emergency management agency. Every state has one. Not every city has one, but every state has one. Every one of them are required to have a website, so you can go to theirs. Specifically, like if you're in Maryland, it's going to be MDEMA, or I think it's MEMA, MEMA, or something like that. But it's the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. And see what they have. They're going to update you on everything that's going on locally in your state. Most counties do have an emergency management agency now. But it may not be the most resourceful, So what you want to keep in your back pocket at all times is, just like you put your credit card in your wallet, put it in case of emergency card. And you want to pick out 3 numbers that can pretty much get you anything, So you need the Red Cross. You need somebody who knows you, next of kin. Doesn't have to be your mom, doesn't have to be your dad. There's somebody who knows you who doesn't live in that state. Write their number down. And number 3, the person for your area, whether it's your city councilman, your county commissioner, those things are all public record. And they will help you. They absolutely will help you. And then, worst case scenario, you call disaster control. And we'll find out for you. Right. We do it all the time.
That or go to ready.gov.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
I said, or go to ready.gov.
Absolutely. Now, ready.gov, and, I am absolutely a FEMA guy. So, I'm always doing the rah-rah thing for FEMA. But ready.gov has gotten very, what's the term I'm looking for? intense. You can easily get lost in Ready.gov's website now. They will post things that are event related, but there's so much information on their site. I myself, a couple of times, have gone, wait a minute, what was I looking for? So they're great, but Prepare.gov and Ready.gov and the FEMA sites and stuff, they have a responsibility to put as much material out as they have on a daily basis. Now, a lot of that may not pertain to you, and God forbid there's 3 or 4 events going at the same time. So it's not that I'm saying don't use them. Use them. Use every resource you got. If this is your life and the life of your family that we're talking about here, use them. The hardest thing that we run into to solve for us is the mentality of it's not going to happen here. It's never happened here before. It's never going to happen. Those people die. And you need only look into the annals of the history of Katrina to see that. Gone are the days where we can stand in our house and go, I built this thing. I know that's what everybody wants to do. Believe me, as somebody who's had their house destroyed by a tornado, I understand. But storms in the 21st century are much more intense. They're much more destructive. I won't get into why that is, because people have their own beliefs. I believe in science. But they come at you much quicker, and technology isn't where we think it should be at this point, coming from our side. And then, you can, like I was saying earlier, you can have all the technology you want. That's not going to do you a lot of good if you're standing there and your power's out, your batteries are dead, because you didn't think to get a battery backup or an extension cord, or, you know what I'm saying? All of these things are in forms, they're in print. You take them to heart, and they'll save your life. They really will, People don't have to die in these storms. They really don't. We have to take that for what it is.
Beautiful. Any final words?
I would just thank you for allowing me to take part in this.
And I thank you.
And I'd just like to remind your listeners and your readers that anytime that there is a preventable or a foreseeable event like a hurricane or a severe thunderstorm, to really listen to what's going on. We tend to call it situational awareness. It's a really big term that says, pay attention. Something bad's about to happen. If you pay attention, you'll save your life. So with that, I thank you for having me.
And I thank you. And this is Robert Buckley with Disaster Control and Prevention, who's the Chief Instructor and CEO, who is also a partner of National Severe Weather Network.